I was sitting in a parking lot, grocery bags in the back seat, when I pressed play on a voicemail that was never meant for me. My husband's voice came through the speaker, low, careful, almost whispering. She doesn't suspect a thing. In that moment, I was sure my marriage was over, but the truth I was about to uncover was so much worse than an affair. It would shatter everything I thought I knew about my husband, about my family, and about the man I had trusted my entire life. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what comes next. This channel is where real emotions live. Stay with me until the end, because this one will surprise you. I have always believed that the worst moments in life don't announce themselves. They don't knock on the door or give you time to prepare. They find you in the most ordinary places, standing in a grocery store line, pouring your morning coffee, or sitting alone in a parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon. That was exactly where I was when my life changed forever. It was a little past 4 o'clock. I had just finished my weekly grocery run at the store on Maplewood Avenue, and I was loading the last bags into the back seat of my car. The afternoon sun was low, cutting sharp shadows across the pavement. I remember thinking about what to make for dinner, something simple, maybe pasta. Daniel had mentioned he might be home late, but he usually was on Tuesdays. I climbed into the driver's seat, set my purse on the passenger side, and reached for my phone to check the time. That's when I noticed the notification. It was on my second phone, an older model I kept mainly for delivery apps and a few shopping accounts. I barely used it for actual calls. Then his voice came through, quiet and deliberate, like someone making sure they wouldn't be overheard. "Hey, it's me. You didn't pick up. I just wanted to say that tonight is fine. She doesn't suspect a thing. After dinner, I'll make up a meeting, and I'll stop by." I stopped breathing. There was a brief pause on the recording, and then he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "I know I promised I'd take care of everything soon. Just give me a little more time. I can't afford to lose half of everything right now." The message ended with the soft click of the call disconnecting. I sat there completely still, my hands resting in my lap, staring at the phone screen as it faded to black. The voice was Daniel's. There was no question about that. I had listened to that voice for 12 years. I knew the way he lowered his tone when he was being careful. I knew the rhythm of his sentences, the way he paused before saying something he had already rehearsed. "She doesn't suspect a thing." The words looped through my mind like a sentence I couldn't finish reading. I didn't cry. I didn't call him back. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat in that parking lot, engine off, the grocery bags slowly warming in the back seat, and I felt the floor of my entire life crack open beneath me. I drove home in silence. No music, no podcast, no phone calls. Just the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing, which felt strangely loud in the quiet of the car. I kept both hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road, moving through the familiar streets of our neighborhood like a woman on autopilot, because that is exactly what I was. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had made a decision. I would not say a word. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to be sure. And more than anything, I needed to watch. Daniel arrived home at 6:45, just as I was setting the table. He came through the front door the same way he always did, loosening his tie before he even stepped inside, dropping his keys on the small shelf by the entrance, calling out my name in that easy, unhurried tone that had always made our house feel calm. "Laura, something smells good." I had made pasta after all. "Just marinara," I said from the kitchen, keeping my voice steady. "Should be ready in 10 minutes. He appeared in the doorway, jacket folded over his arm, and smiled at me. It was a familiar smile, warm, a little tired, completely normal. The smile of a man who had simply had a long day at work. I smiled back, and I hated how easy it was. We sat down to dinner and talked the way we always did. He mentioned a problem with a shipment delay at work. I told him about the long line at the grocery store. He poured himself a glass of water, refilled mine without being asked, and asked whether I had remembered to call the plumber about the slow drain in the guest bathroom. I watched every move he made. The way he checked his phone twice during dinner, screen angled slightly away from me. The way he cleared his throat before answering a question I hadn't even asked yet. The way his jaw tightened, just for a second, when his phone buzzed and he chose to ignore it. Small things. Things I might never have noticed before yesterday, but I noticed them now. After dinner, he offered to wash the dishes. He always did that on Tuesdays. I stood nearby, drying them slowly, and I studied his profile, the line of his jaw, The way he stared at the sink without really seeing it, his mind clearly somewhere else entirely. I thought about the voicemail. I'll make up a meeting, and I'll stop by. He hadn't invented a meeting tonight. He had come home, eaten dinner, and acted like a man with nothing to hide, which somehow made everything worse, because either the plans had changed, or I still didn't know the whole story, and I was beginning to understand that those were two very different things. I waited 3 days before I called the number. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I moved through them carefully, like someone walking across ice, testing each step before committing my full weight, afraid that one wrong move would send everything crashing beneath me. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I asked Daniel about his day. I laughed at the right moments and stayed quiet at the right moments, and every single second of it felt like a performance I hadn't auditioned for. At night, I lay beside him in the dark and listened to him breathe. He slept soundly. He always had. I stared at the ceiling. On the 4th morning, after Daniel left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with the old phone in my hand and looked at the number for a long time. It was a local area code. That much I could tell. Nothing else about it was familiar. I pressed call. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. No name, no greeting. Just a brief automated message asking me to leave my name and number after the tone. The voice was a woman's. I hung up without saying anything. I tried again that afternoon. Same result. And again, the following morning. By the 5th attempt, I had memorized the number without meaning to. Those 10 digits had carved themselves into my memory the way certain things do when they carry enough weight. I turned to the internet next. I typed the number into 3 different search engines, tried 2 reverse lookup directories, and checked it against every social media platform I could think of. Nothing came back. No name, no address, no profile. Whoever owned that number had either kept it completely private or had gone out of their way to make sure it couldn't be traced. That detail alone told me something. Normal people didn't scrub their phone numbers from the internet. Normal people didn't let calls go to voicemail with no identifying information. Normal people didn't receive whispered messages from married men promising to stop by after inventing a fake meeting. I closed my laptop and pressed my hands flat against the kitchen table. I needed to think clearly. I needed facts, not assumptions. But the facts I had were already damning enough. A voicemail, a number that didn't answer, a husband who checked his phone at dinner and stared at the kitchen sink like a man carrying a secret he hadn't yet decided what to do with. And then there was the line that kept coming back to me, the one I couldn't reason away no matter how hard I tried. I can't afford to lose half of everything right now. He wasn't just talking about love, he was talking about money. And that meant whatever this was, it was bigger than I had first allowed myself to believe. It was a Thursday evening when Daniel mentioned the event. We were in the living room after dinner, the television on low in the background, when he looked up from his phone and said it in that casual tone he used for things he wanted to sound unimportant. I almost forgot to tell you. There's a corporate dinner next Friday. One of the logistics partners is hosting a formal event at the Meridian Hotel downtown. Clients, executives, the usual crowd. I'll probably be there until 10, maybe later. I kept my eyes on the book in my lap. Will it be a late night? I asked. Most likely, he said. These things always run long. I nodded slowly, turned a page I hadn't actually read, and said nothing more. But inside, every nerve in my body had gone completely still. The Meridian Hotel, downtown, a Friday night, a formal event with enough people to disappear into, and enough cover to slip away unnoticed. I thought about the voicemail. After dinner, I'll make up a meeting, and I'll stop by. This wasn't a made-up meeting. This was a real event, with a real guest list, at a real location, which meant Daniel wasn't being careless. He was being careful. He was using a legitimate obligation as a shield, something he could point to if I ever asked questions, something that existed on paper and couldn't be disputed. That level of planning frightened me more than anything else. In the days that followed, I paid attention to everything. I noticed that he confirmed the event twice in passing, mentioning the hotel name again on Tuesday as if reminding himself out loud. I noticed that he took his best suit to the dry cleaner on Wednesday, which he rarely did for ordinary work functions. I noticed that on Thursday night he stayed in the home office later than usual, the door pulled almost shut, his voice too low to make out through the walls. I stood in the hallway for a moment, just outside that door, and listened. I couldn't hear the words, only the tone, measured, focused, the voice of a man working through something that required concentration. I walked back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. For the first time since the parking lot, I felt something shift inside me. Not grief, not anger, but something colder and more deliberate. A decision forming quietly at the back of my mind, the way decisions do when you finally run out of patience for uncertainty. I was done waiting for the truth to find me. If Daniel was going to that hotel on Friday night, then so was I. I didn't know what I would find there, but I knew I was done being the woman in the voicemail, the one who didn't suspect a thing. I spent Friday afternoon getting ready in a way Daniel would never notice. No new dress, no unfamiliar perfume. I chose a dark blazer I hadn't worn in months, a pair of black slacks and low heels that wouldn't make noise on marble floors. I pulled my hair back simply and kept my makeup minimal. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in a hotel lobby, without looking like anyone in particular. Invisible. That was the goal. Daniel left the house at 7:15, kissed me on the cheek, and told me not to wait up. I waited exactly 12 minutes before I followed him. I drove a route I knew well, straight down Hargrove Boulevard, left on Central, then across the bridge toward the downtown corridor where the Meridian Hotel stood on the corner of 5th and Ellison, its glass facade lit up against the night sky. I had passed that building 100 times without ever going inside. I parked 2 blocks away and walked. The lobby was exactly what I had expected. Polished floors, low lighting, the kind of quiet elegance that required money to maintain. A few guests moved through the space unhurried, and near the far end of the lobby, a set of double doors stood open, soft music drifting out from whatever event was being held inside. I approached slowly, staying close to the wall. Through the open doors, I could see the ballroom, round tables draped in white linen, suited men and women holding wine glasses, the murmur of conversation layered beneath the music. A corporate event, exactly as Daniel had described, real, legitimate, and well-attended. I scanned the room carefully. I found him near the center, standing with a small group of men I didn't recognize. He was holding a glass of water, nodding at something one of them was saying. He looked composed and present, the version of Daniel that the professional world knew, reliable, measured, easy to trust. I stayed near the entrance, partially hidden behind a tall decorative panel, and I watched. For the first 20 minutes, nothing unusual happened. He moved between small groups, exchanged handshakes, checked his phone twice, standard behavior for someone working a room. But then, around 7:50, something changed. He stopped mid-conversation, glanced toward the far side of the ballroom, and excused himself from the group with a brief nod. He didn't head toward the bar or the restrooms. He moved with quiet purpose toward the corridor at the back of the room, the one that led away from the event entirely. My heart rate climbed. I slipped through the edge of the crowd, staying far enough behind to avoid being seen, close enough not to lose him. He didn't look back once, and I followed him into the corridor, my footsteps silent, my breath carefully controlled, and everything I thought I knew about that night began to unravel. The hallway beyond the ballroom was long and quietly lit, the kind of corridor that exists in hotels to move people efficiently from one place to another without drawing attention. Neutral carpet, soft overhead lighting, a row of closed doors on either side. The noise from the event faded quickly behind me, replaced by a silence that felt deliberate. Daniel was about 30 feet ahead. He walked without hesitation, without stopping to check room numbers or glance at his surroundings. He knew exactly where he was going. That detail alone settled into my chest like a stone, because it told me this wasn't the first time he had been here. I slowed my pace and stayed close to the wall, using the shadow between the overhead lights to keep myself out of his line of sight. My heels were silent on the carpet. My breathing was slow and controlled, though every instinct in my body was telling me to turn around, to go back to the lobby, to get in my car and drive home and pretend the last 2 weeks had never happened. I kept walking. Daniel stopped near the end of the corridor, beside a door marked with a small brass placard I couldn't read from where I stood. He didn't knock. He didn't check his phone. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, waiting. I pressed myself into the narrow alcove of a doorway and watched. 30 seconds passed, maybe 40. Then I heard a door open somewhere behind me, not in front of Daniel, but from a side corridor that branched off to the left. Soft footsteps on carpet, the faint sound of someone moving quickly but quietly. A woman appeared at the corner. She was perhaps 40, dressed in a charcoal gray jacket and dark trousers, her hair pulled back neatly. She carried a leather bag over one shoulder and a thin document folder pressed flat against her side. She walked with the kind of purposeful calm that I associated with people who were used to being in rooms where the stakes were high. She didn't smile when she saw Daniel. She simply moved toward him, glanced once over her shoulder, and stopped close enough that their conversation would carry no further than the space between them. I held my breath. She spoke first, her voice low but clear enough that I could catch every word in the stillness of the corridor. "You're late." Daniel's response was immediate and quiet. I had to make sure no one followed me. Something cold moved through me when I heard that. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. There was no guilt in his voice, no nervousness, only focus. The tone of someone managing a situation that required precision, not emotion. The woman reached into her document folder and produced a manila envelope. She held it at her side without offering it to him yet, her eyes still moving briefly down the corridor in both directions. I pulled further back into the alcove. My pulse was loud in my ears. I was close enough to see the line of Daniel's jaw, the way he stood slightly forward, his full attention locked onto whatever she was about to say next. This was not the body language of a man meeting someone he loved. It was the body language of a man in the middle of something serious, something planned, something deliberate, something that had been set in motion long before tonight. And I was standing in a hotel corridor, hidden in the shadows, about to find out exactly what that was. She handed him the envelope. Daniel took it without a word, turned slightly away from the corridor, and opened it with the careful efficiency of someone who had been waiting for its contents for a long time. I watched his eyes move across whatever was inside, quickly at first, then slower, pausing on specific pages, his expression unreadable from where I stood. The woman waited. She kept her posture straight, and her eyes on the corridor, scanning both directions at measured intervals. She wasn't nervous exactly, but she was alert in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. This was not a woman meeting a man for a casual exchange. Every movement she made was deliberate, contained, and professional. Daniel looked up from the envelope. "Is this everything?" he asked. "Everything we were able to pull together in the last 3 weeks," she said. "Bank statements, wire transfer records, shell company registrations. There are also 2 contracts in there, both backdated, both carrying signatures that don't match the notarized originals we recovered." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "How many accounts?" 7 that we've confirmed," she said. "Possibly 2 more, but the paper trail on those runs through offshore holding companies. It'll take more time to untangle." He nodded slowly, sliding the documents back into the envelope and folding it closed. "This is enough to move forward?" "More than enough," she said. "The moment this goes to the federal office, the account freezes begin within 48 hours. After that, it moves quickly." I pressed my back against the wall of the alcove and tried to process what I was hearing. Bank statements, wire transfers, falsified contracts, federal office. This wasn't an affair. The realization moved through me slowly, the way understanding sometimes does when the truth is so far from what you expected that your mind resists accepting it. I had followed my husband to a hotel corridor prepared to witness a betrayal, and instead, I was standing in the shadows, listening to a conversation I couldn't fully comprehend. Then Daniel said something that stopped everything. "She still doesn't know." The woman looked at him. "You haven't told her anything?" "Nothing," he said. "And I can't. Not yet. If she finds out before the investigation goes official, she'll go to him. I know she will. She won't be able to help herself." The woman was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant risk to your marriage," she said. "Keeping someone in the dark at this level. It leaves damage that doesn't always repair itself." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I know that," he said. "I've thought about it every day for the past 4 months. 4 months. He had been carrying this for 4 months, without saying a single word to me. "When it's over," he continued, "I'll tell her everything. She'll understand why I had to do it this way. She'll have to." The woman didn't respond to that. She simply reached into her bag, produced a small card, and pressed it into his hand. "The meeting is set for Monday morning," she said. "Don't contact me after tonight unless it's through the secure line." She turned and walked back the way she had come, disappearing around the corner of the side corridor without looking back. Daniel stood alone in the hallway for a long moment, the envelope in one hand and the card in the other, staring at the floor. And I stood in my alcove, completely still, understanding, for the first time, that the secret my husband was keeping had nothing to do with another woman, but it had everything to do with destroying someone I loved. I don't know how long I stood in that alcove after the woman disappeared. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 3 minutes. Time had stopped behaving normally, and the corridor around me felt simultaneously too bright and too small, like a space that had shrunk while I wasn't paying attention. Daniel was still standing at the end of the hall. He hadn't moved. He was looking down at the card in his hand, turning it slowly between his fingers, his back partially toward me. In the quiet of the corridor, with the distant murmur of the corporate event still filtering faintly through the walls, he looked like a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't step back from. I should have left then. I should have walked back through the ballroom, out through the lobby, down the 2 blocks to my car and driven home. I should have poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and waited for him to come home so I could ask him directly, calmly, clearly, what was happening. Instead, I stayed, because there was one piece I still didn't have. One piece that the conversation between Daniel and the woman had circled around without naming directly. She had said the accounts were tied to shell companies. She had mentioned falsified contracts and backdated signatures. She had talked about a federal investigation moving quickly once it went official. And Daniel had said, if she finds out before the investigation goes official, she'll go to him. Him. I turned that word over in my mind the way you press on a bruise, carefully, dreading what you'll feel. She'll go to him. Who was him? Daniel finally moved. He slid the card into his inside jacket pocket, tucked the envelope under his arm, and turned to walk back toward the ballroom. I pressed further into the alcove and held completely still as he passed within 15 feet of where I was standing. He didn't see me. He walked past with his eyes forward, his expression composed, already reassembling the version of himself that belonged at a corporate dinner, the reliable, steady, unremarkable man who managed logistics accounts and came home on time and asked whether I had remembered to call the plumber. I waited until his footsteps faded. Then I stepped out of the alcove and stood alone in the corridor. My hands were trembling slightly. I pressed them flat against my thighs and breathed slowly, deliberately, the way I used to do before difficult conversations at work, when I needed to stay composed regardless of what I was feeling inside. Think, Laura. She'll go to him. Daniel had said it with certainty, not as a criticism, but as a fact. He knew me well enough to know exactly what I would do if I found out, which meant the person he was protecting the investigation from wasn't a stranger to me. It was someone I was close to, someone I would instinctively want to warn, someone I trusted completely. And then, standing alone in that quiet hotel corridor, with the faint sound of music drifting through the walls, the answer arrived, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet and devastating certainty of something that had always been true. My father. The investigation was about my father. The shell companies, the falsified contracts, the offshore accounts, they all led back to one name, a name I had grown up trusting without question, a name that meant safety and stability and everything solid in my world. And my husband had spent 4 months dismantling it, piece by piece, document by document, in complete silence, while I made dinner and asked about his day. I drove home in a different kind of silence than the one I had driven in 2 weeks earlier. That first silence, the night of the voicemail, had been the silence of shock. Raw, disorienting, the kind that empties you out completely and leaves nothing but the ringing in your ears. This silence was heavier. This was the silence of someone who had asked for the truth and received it, only to discover that the truth was not a door that opened into clarity. It was a door that opened into a room full of more doors, and every single one of them led somewhere painful. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the dark for a long time before going inside. My father's name was Richard Calloway. He was 63 years old, a well-regarded businessman who had built a regional supply chain consulting firm over 30 years of careful, deliberate work. He had a reputation in this city, not flashy, not political, but solid, the kind of man other men called when they needed someone they could trust. I had called him that same man my entire life. He had walked me down the aisle at our wedding. He had sat beside Daniel at our kitchen table on holidays and talked about football and interest rates and the state of small business in America. He had hugged me at my mother's funeral 6 years ago and told me that some things in life break you, but they don't have to break you permanently. I had believed every version of him that I had ever been shown. And now my husband, the man I had accused in my own mind of running a secret second life, had spent 4 months quietly building a federal case against him. I went inside, changed out of my clothes, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. The question I couldn't escape was not whether Daniel was right. The documents, the accounts, the falsified contracts. If what that woman described was accurate, the evidence existed regardless of what I felt about it. Federal investigators didn't move forward on sentiment. The question that was tearing me apart was simpler and far more brutal. What was I supposed to do now? I knew something I wasn't supposed to know. I had followed my husband to a hotel and stood in a corridor and listened to a conversation that was never intended for me. If I confronted Daniel tonight, he would know I had been there. The investigation, whatever stage it had reached, could be compromised. The woman had said Monday morning. The meeting was set. That was 3 days away, and my father didn't know what was coming. I pressed my hands over my face and sat there in the quiet of our bedroom, breathing slowly, trying to find the edge of something steady to hold on to. Because here was the thing no one tells you about discovering a secret this size. It doesn't just change what you know. It changes who you are in relation to every person connected to it. I was no longer simply Laura Bennett, a woman who had suspected her husband of having an affair. I was now a woman who knew her father might be a criminal, a woman whose husband had chosen to protect a federal investigation over his own marriage, a woman sitting in the dark 3 days before everything collapsed, trying to decide whether the most honest thing she could do was nothing at all. Daniel came home at 10:45. I heard the front door open, his keys on the shelf, the familiar sounds of a man returning to a house he believed was exactly as he had left it. I was sitting in the living room when he walked in, not in bed, not pretending to be asleep, but present and still, with the lamp on and my hands folded in my lap. He stopped when he saw me. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not fear, but a careful recognition. The look of a man who understood immediately that the conversation he had been postponing for 4 months had finally arrived. He sat down across from me without being asked. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, quietly and without anger, "I followed you tonight." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he didn't look away. "I know," he said. "I saw you in the corridor. I didn't say anything because I didn't know how much you had heard." The admission hit me harder than I expected, not because he had seen me, but because he had chosen to come home and wait, the same way I had. "Enough," I said. "I heard enough." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not the composed, professional Daniel, not the easy, domestic Daniel. Something stripped down and exhausted, the face of a man who had been carrying something enormous for a very long time and had finally set it down. "I need you to understand something," he said. "I never wanted to do this without you. This was never about keeping secrets from you because I didn't trust you. I kept you out of it because the moment you knew, you would have been in an impossible position, and I could not put you there. You put me there anyway," I said. He nodded. "I know that now." I looked at him for a long time, at the man I had married, the man I had suspected, the man who had been sitting across from me at dinner every night for 4 months with this weight pressing down on him in silence. "Is the evidence real?" I asked. "Yes. All of it?" "All of it," he said. "Laura, I wish it wasn't. I spent the first month hoping I had misread something. I hadn't. The room was very quiet. My father doesn't know what's coming," I said. "No," Daniel said carefully. "And I need to ask you directly, to let it proceed. Not for me. For every person whose money was taken, whose contracts were falsified, who trusted someone they shouldn't have. It was the hardest thing anyone had ever asked me. And somewhere in the deepest, most honest part of myself, beneath the grief, beneath the shock, beneath the loyalty of a daughter who had never once questioned the man who raised her, I already knew what my answer had to be. I didn't say yes that night, but I didn't say no either. I stood up, turned off the lamp, and walked to the bedroom. Daniel followed. We didn't speak again until morning. But for the first time in 2 weeks, we were finally in the same room, carrying the same truth, facing the same impossible horizon, together. Thank you so much for staying with me through every chapter of this story. Now I want to hear from you. If you were Laura, sitting in that living room, lamp on, hands folded, waiting for your husband to walk through that door, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent and let the investigation move forward, even knowing your own father would be at the center of it? Or would you have picked up the phone and warned him, regardless of the consequences? Leave your answer in the comments below. There is no right or wrong here, only honest ones. And tell me this too. Have you ever discovered that someone you completely trusted was not who you thought they were? How did you handle it? Your stories matter. This community grows because of the honesty you bring to it. And I read every single comment. If this story stayed with you, if it made your heart race or made you stop and think, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it means everything to this channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Every week there is a new story waiting for you here, the kind that stays with you long after it ends. You belong in this community. Hit subscribe and make it official. That is all for today. But before you go, I need to tell you something. Tomorrow, a brand new story drops on this channel. A story about a woman who found a receipt in her husband's coat pocket. A receipt for a hotel room booked on the same night. He told her he was visiting his sick mother out of town. What she discovered when she started pulling that one thread apart will leave you speechless. Same channel. Tomorrow. Don't miss it. Until then, take care of yourself, trust your instincts, and never stop asking the questions that matter. See you tomorrow.